Our last and most important prize, all these prizes are important, is the Bernal Prize. And Paul Edwards is going to present.
Well, this is a great pleasure on behalf of the Bernal Prize Committee, who included this year Judy Weissman, Evelyn Keller, and Trevor, as well as myself. This year's prize goes to Sandra Harding. Sandra Harding, unfortunately, is a philosopher. Sorry about that. It has to be said. Now, I'm very, very glad to be giving her this award. I want to say, first of all, that we have a very short time to say things about people, and I have compressed much of what I would have liked to say into just 4 minutes. I could now recite to you her entire CV, but that would take a long time. I want to really focus instead on what the content of her work has been about. So Sandra has pioneered, through a very long career, not only feminist science studies, but also anti-racist and post-colonial science studies. And it sounds like there were 80 people at her session on post-colonial science studies today, so that's a mark of the influence of that work. She taught for 2 decades at the University of Delaware. In 1996, she moved to UCLA, where she directed the UCLA Center for the Study of Women. She co-edited the journal Signs, Journal of Women in Culture and Society, from 2000 to 2005. She has taught at universities in Europe, Asia, and Central America, as well as in the United States. And she has lectured on 5 continents, consulted to UNESCO, the Pan American Health Organization, the UN Development Fund for Women, the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development. And she is the author or editor of 15 books on special journal issues. So it's for those achievements that we are honoring her today, but not just for those. More importantly, we are honoring how her contributions changed and deepened the field of science studies. Foremost among her contributions are feminist and post-colonial standpoint theories. Her book, The Science Question in Feminism, appeared in 1986. And believe me, since I wanted to be a philosopher of science at that point, she made philosophy of science a lot more interesting. In that book, she laid out with enormous clarity the argument that gender shapes the way people perceive and interact with the world, even to the extent of shaping truth itself. Sandra famously and very controversially argued that rather than take physics as the gold standard for all of science, we should instead take the social sciences as the paradigm of inquiry, since they are engaged with gender, race, class, and other social categories, which, in her view, must be applied equally to the natural sciences and mathematics. As a historian, I can't resist pointing out that unlike most philosophers, Sandra has always been acutely sensitive to historical as well as to cultural difference. In her 1998 book, Is Science Multicultural?, she argued that both European expansion and modern science depended on the exploitation and absorption of local knowledges. And in her most recent monograph, Sciences from Below, subtitled Feminisms, Post-Colonialisms, and Modernities, in 2008, she pressed science studies to become even more controversial than it already is. She asked us to take 2 questions seriously. One is this: how do northern science and technology affect the peoples and cultures of the world's periphery? From Amazonian natives to the peoples of Tuvalu and the Maldives, those people and cultures are screaming for attention, not only to their political and territorial concerns, but to the uniqueness and irreplaceability of their ways of living and thinking. The other question regards the binary opposition of the modern, marked as rational, cultured, and or male, and the traditional, often marked as natural, primitive, and or female. How do science and technology studies implicitly borrow those ready-made markings, convenient for those of us soaked in their juices from Throughout her career, Sandra Harding has taken on some of the most difficult and controversial questions of our time, and she has stubbornly persisted in raising them against both direct opposition and its more insidious partner, the tendency to avoid the truly difficult and the uncomfortable. As one of the hundreds of graduate students who was marked by her work in my own career, it's a deep pleasure for me to award this honor, and I hope she's going to come up here and make us even more uncomfortable.
Now is presenting her a phantom check, an empty envelope, which may or may not result in money coming to her account later.
Thank you so much. I am so honored by this. I want to thank first the Bernal Committee. I just, when Paul called me from London in January, I thought it was a fake call. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. It was wonderful. Secondly, I want to thank 4S for having been for many years a very welcoming home for me. I know that won't seem like a lot to you if I tell you I compare it to the Philosophy of Science Association, but unfortunately it's not a very high bar you've had to reach. It's been a great, great pleasure for me, and it's you all have changed my thinking in so many ways. Third, I'd like to thank the left tradition in science and technology studies and in science itself, to which Bernal made such significant contributions. And by the left tradition, I mean not only the Marxist and post-Marxist tendencies in science studies and in the sciences, but also feminist, decolonizing, anti-racist, and other such social movements with deep interest in science and technology, who, long before some very significant 4S people beautifully articulated the principle that societies and their sciences co-produce and co-constitute each other, understood that racist societies will produce racist sciences, that provide resources for those racist societies, and so forth. And so this left tradition, I think, is one of the proudest, should be regarded as one of the proudest legacies that 4S can claim. Now I want to turn to this issue of you giving a prize to a philosopher, which has been mentioned already by several people. I mean, this, I thought, this is when I had talked to Paul back in January, am I the first formally trained philosopher to be awarded the prize? And I got kind of scared because my introduction to science studies, let me say, in my early graduate student years was Thomas Kuhn and then David Bloor. And you know, they defined the sociology of scientific knowledge against philosophy of science. So, on the one hand, it's true, I have always, in 35 plus years of university appointments, every one of those years, I've had either a joint appointment or a main appointment in a social science department. I now exist in a department with 51 social scientists and one other philosopher. They all study education, but it's like living in the laboratory for me. I get to my colleagues, so I get to watch what my colleagues do, and this has been the case for many years. But on the other hand, my most beloved professor as a graduate student was my philosopher of science, and he had been a student of Carnap's. Rudolf Carnap's at the Vienna Circle. And on Carnap's birthday, every fall, we'd have a moment of silence in my philosophy of science class to commemorate Carnap's birth. And many decades later, when I had an office in the UCLA philosophy department for a while, I occupied the office that Carnap had occupied when Reichenbach brought him to UCLA, and there was Carnap's picture right outside my door, and I thought how my old philosophy of science professor would have been puzzled by how it was that I got to be in that office. But as I tried to withdraw from the heady pleasures of celebrating Carnap's birthday, I thought of myself as a recovering logical positivist. I practically had to go into a 12-step program. I call people up when I slip back, as I do sometimes. And so what I do when I feel this residual pull of logical positivism is I call one of two kinds of people. One is a continental philosopher. I have many continental philosophy friends, and I call them to help me get past this urge I have to go back and seek out verisimilitude or some such thing. Or I call a friend from science studies. So you all have saved me from slipping back into a life of addiction to a very dangerous drug indeed. Thank you very much.